For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace, and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Clearly states that God wants to give us a hope and a future. He gets our attention in order to give us that hope and a future that He promised. The methods God uses to get our attention are not the same for everyone, but there are some that are common attention getters. When God is attempting to get our attention, we need to give heed to the things that are happening to us and all around us. In this video, we listed 10 ways God uses to get your attention. However, there could be plenty more. Disruptions. One of the quickest ways God gets our attention is by stopping what we are doing, by disrupting our plans. God isn't being mean to us when He interrupts us. He is just forcing us to slow down and to focus more on Him. Perhaps we made our plans without Him. To keep us from going in the wrong direction, God stops us from doing what we are doing even though we have convinced ourselves that we are doing the right thing. The story of the Tower of Babel, found in Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9, is a great example of how God disrupts people's plans. Restlessness. When God wants us to do something, He might make us restless until we do what He wants us to do. A good example is recorded in Esther 6 verses 1 to 3. One night the king was restless and couldn't sleep. He got out of bed and ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. He heard about Mordecai who had done a good deed, and had not been rewarded for it. Things were put in place for Mordecai to be rewarded, and the entire Jewish nation was spared. It was because of the king's restlessness. Voices. God gets our attention through the voice of those who we don't expect to hear from. God spoke through young Samuel to give Eli a divine message. It took Eli 4 times to understand what was going on. God spoke through Samuel to get his message to Eli, according to 1 Samuel 3. By saying no. God sometimes says no to our prayer. We don't like to hear it, but He does use this method to get our attention. This is the way God got David's attention when his child was sick and died. David had prayed fervently for his baby not to die, but God denied David's request. That got David's attention, and he accepted it. Unusual blessings. God gets our attention through unusual blessings. You must admit that it was an unusual blessing for Elijah to be fed by ravens while he was hiding from Jezebel at the Kerith brook. Ravens took him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and Elijah drank from the brook. God definitely got Elijah's attention. He wanted Elijah to know that he could depend on him instead of Jezebel. God wants us to know that we can depend on Him for our needs. Disappointments. God uses disappointments to get our attention. The Bible records stories of lots of people who were disappointed when they did not get what they wanted. Several women were barren and prayed for sons. They were disappointed while God worked out the right time for it to happen. Most of the barren women were also old. They thought they would never have a male child. They all eventually did, but only after great disappointment before it happened. Extreme circumstances. Sometimes God will use extreme circumstances and situations to get our attention. The circumstances are so unusual that we can't help but stop and listen. A very good example of a bizarre situation is recorded in Exodus 3, when Moses encountered God in a burning bush. Bushes are not in the desert, and if they were there, they would not burn by themselves, and surely God wouldn't be speaking from one. However, that is exactly what happened, and surely it got Moses' attention. Defeat. How could a small city like Ai defeat Joshua's large army of about 3,000 men? The city of Ai defeated the Israelite army, and God used the defeat to get Joshua's attention. Israel learned a big lesson after it was surprisingly defeated, according to Joshua 7 verses 4 to 5. Loss of possessions. Job was rich and he had it all, but he also lost it all. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and a large number of servants. Job lost them all in one day, including his 10 children. All these losses got Job's attention, especially since he had done nothing wrong. Job began to pay attention through the loss of his possessions. Tragedies. Not only did Job experience tragedies through the loss of all of his possessions, but Job also experienced sickness and affliction that got his attention. Job was afflicted with sores all over his body. Even though Job's encounters got his attention, we should never think God caused those things. In the very first chapter of Job, the devil wanted to see if Job would still serve God if he experienced tragedies and losses. Perhaps the above 10 methods that God uses will give you some ideas about why you have encountered some of the things you have. God wants to do so much for us, but first He must get our attention. If unexplainable things are happening to you, it might be God's way of getting your attention in order to give you a hope and a future. Pray to God, and ask Him what He is saying to you through those particular attention getters. Could it be that God is trying to get your attention? How much pain and loss will you have to endure until you fully surrender your disobedient spirit to Him and start obeying His holy word?